to the Makerspace at Swarthmore. We are here with one of my student technicians, Scott Candey, and we're here to find out more about his time in the Makerspace and his interests and hobbies and anything else he wants to share with us. So thank you for being here, Scott.
Thank
And
you for
I
having me.
can see that you have a lovely background of the Rose Garden at Swarthmore. um, so it's nice that we can be wherever we want to be in the whole world, right? In these Zoom chats. Can you start by telling us about your any majors, minors, clubs that you're in academically at Swarthmore?
Yeah, so I am a senior engineering major at Swarthmore. I run the Swing Dance Club, which is on hiatus, and I, in the past, have been in charge of sci-fi, which is not the frat, the nerd club, for lack of a better word, that does the Dactyl Hunt and other events with relation to tabletop gaming and nerdy media in general.
Okay. And you were involved in a theater group for a little while, right? Or
That's true. I did lighting. I do lighting for Yellow Stockings and a couple of other student theater groups with relation to Drama Board. So that's the student theater overarching organization at Swarthmore. And so I've done lighting for some of their shows and some of the drama department shows and some of LPAC's special shows as well.
so quite a robust extracurricular life. um, so when did you start working in the makerspace? And what
Um,
made you want to start working there?
yeah, so I was a media center consultant with Jeremy's group in the media center for the fall of my sophomore year. And as we were starting to look to hire, or as the ITS department was starting to hire people for Makerspace coordinator, Brandon Zunin and I were drafted to start helping look at that. So I had experience with 3D printers in the past, and the ITS department had bought a couple, and they were currently in Andrew Ruther's office, I think. And so they were trying to expand into the sculpture space to make the woodshop more open to the public. So we interviewed people. I got to interview Russell, the original Makerspace coordinator, and um, we set up the space. Russell like designed most of the woodshop materials, and we were using most of the sculpture stuff. But I had a really good time talking to Andrew and Russell about how to set up the digital fabrications lab.
So you were really involved from the ground up, kind of, in the development of the space. That's wonderful. Um, and how have you used the makerspace yourself, either personally or academically?
So when I was a freshman and sophomore, so before the Makerspace actually fully existed, I used the sculpture space a lot to cut out plastic to make spray paint stencils. So we would use the laser cutter to in the engineering workshop, and then the spray booth in the sculpture space, and like use wood from the sculpture space to make jigs and stuff, to make small paintings, small spray paintings of space, of different characters. I remember Overwatch was a game that was big right at the time, and Overwatch has a feature where you can spray virtual spray painting art onto the walls of the game. And so we replicated a bunch of those, and that was what really got me interested in the laser cutter, which has continued throughout my time working at Swarthmore, or working at the Makerspace, that I've been really interested in what you can make with the laser cutter that you can't make with any other tool.
Yeah, you have built up quite a proficiency with the laser cutter. um, and can you think of one or more things that I mean, you talked a little bit about the laser cutter, but is there anything else that you feel like you've learned that has just helped you grow from being in the makerspace?
So when I was younger, my dad trained me in like basic woodworking stuff, but he is not a professional. And so it was really good as I've been working at the Makerspace, learning proper ways to work with woodworking tools, and the more wide selection of stuff we have available. So that was a really good experience that when I would work shifts that were adjacent to the sculpture class in art. I never actually took the sculpture class, but I did have a good time learning some of those techniques as they were working on them very indirectly.
That's great. And your dad was involved in kind of setting up or running a makerspace, wasn't he?
Yeah, so he ran the Greenbelt Makerspace in my hometown for a number of years. And unfortunately, that is now moved to a tool lending library style system, so they don't have a permanent space anymore because of the um, movie theater in my town wanting to expand and being able to pay much more than they could for the space. But that's okay.
Okay. And little anecdote, Scott and I are from the same hometown, so we found that out as we were working together in the makerspace. And can you think of a time, it can be more than one occasion or just a time that you remember helping someone else and you know, maybe a fulfilling moment for you?
So I remember a really good project that I did my sophomore spring, early in the Makerspace time, that I was working with Faye, who is graduate 2 years ago, I guess, um, who was doing a special major adjacent to the art department that was all about costumes, about making fashion, that kind of thing. So we had a really good time building models, building busts onto platforms in order to make the dresses stand up taller. Um, she was working on a um, leather worked armor piece. So we laser cut out all the armor instead of leather instead of having to cut that out by hand. And seeing that go from a flat sheet on the printer to a like fully like formed leather coat on a mannequin kind of thing was a really cool experience to see. Of course, I didn't do any of the design, but it was very, very fun to um, help make that become a reality.
Yeah, so that's a great experience to see something go from just a flat piece of material into something three-dimensional and something that turns into a garment that's also functional. So that does sound exciting. And what have you been doing to keep yourself busy during our COVID-19 quarantine?
So I made a series of masks over the past couple of evenings. When I get frustrated at sitting at my computer for too long, I go out in the kitchen and tear apart another sheet to get more material to make another mask. And I'm slowly getting better at it. Not to the point where I'd want to actually donate them to anyone because they're not really useful, but they're very useful for me and for my family. So that's what I've been working on. That's hands-on. I've been doing training on Lynda and YouTube in general for Blender, which is a 3D modeling software, free open source 3D modeling software that I'm a personal big fan of. And it's particularly used for visual effects in filmmaking, but it can also be used for 3D printing stuff. So I'm still exploring after using it for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's really big in kind of the animation world, right? That's wonderful. So both learning and making and at the same time. Um, and what are some maker related topics that or skill sets that you would like to learn either now or in the future? I know you talked about a couple of things, but are there any other skills that you haven't had the chance to learn or expand on as much as you like?
So I'm sewing these masks in the
Mhm.
loosest term. So I would love to be able to learn to do more actual fashion design, learning how to make the patterns instead of just executing them, and learning how to execute them better. I'm not super skilled with the sewing machine, and that would be something I would love to learn. Yes, I've been looking forward to talking to Tara Webb, our costume shop manager at Swarthmore, more about how to do the sewing machine, how to use the sewing machine to its fullest extent, and and definitely how to sew better by hand. This is something that I've been frustrated with in the past, and so I've put off to the side. But it would be a good skill to come back to and learn.
Yeah, well, when you become proficient, you're welcome to teach me because those are things that I'd love to learn too. And my last question is, can you name like a favorite thing that you've ever made, or
Hmm.
pick something that, gives you a really fond memory?
So we, a year ago, maybe, a little over a year ago, put together a sculpture. So someone in the sculpture class was working on a scan of something they wanted to make in both uh, 3D printing material in plastic and in wood. And so I got to work on scanning this balloon turtle. So it was a balloon animal turtle that we 3D scanned, loaded it into the 3D printers, printed it out, cut it apart, did that a couple times in a couple different sizes. And I still have a balloon turtle somewhere in my room in plastic because it was just such a lovely project to then see it be taken apart and put back together in different materials and have it all kind of mesh together. So that's one of my favorite like stories of helping people, I think. Um, I'm not sure what my favorite thing that I've ever personally made. If it isn't the spray painted art that I've continued to do on the side. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have any of it here because it's all in my room at Swarthmore, but
Oh,
that's okay. It'll
yeah.
come back to me eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah, at least you have the skill set to replicate what you've done too. Um, and yeah, that process sounds um, really great because you got to kind of like take things apart and then rebuild them and sort of get a more in-depth experience with, the making process of it. So, all right, well, that concludes my questions for today. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your interests or hobbies or anything that we should know about you as a Swarthmore makerspace technician?
Well, I hope that people take advantage of the makerspace. It's been a long time coming, and we're in a new space with new exciting stuff. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be in the same space, but in a new version of the same space, which will give us even more flexibility. So I hope people do make the trek across the parking lot to come see you. It is a lovely place with a lot of really good creative energy.
Thank you. That's a wonderful way to wrap up our interview. And so nice to catch up with you. And so stay tuned for more interviews with our Makerspace technician. And we'll be signing off